Thank you for listening to the Radio Maria podcast on the world family of Radio Maria stations.
Thank you so much for listening to the Radio Maria podcasts. It's thanks to listeners like you who donate that enable us to continue delivering quality content to listeners around the world. If you'd like to contribute and help us keep spreading the message of Our Lady's Son, please consider making a donation. You can reach us at 888-408-0201 or simply visit our donations tab on our website at radiomaria.us. Your generosity truly makes a difference.
You are listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now present our program, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with your host, Roy Schoeman.
Hi, this is Roy Schoeman, and welcome once again to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, the show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic Church, or seen the other way around, that celebrates the fulfillment, the full realization of the promise of Judaism in the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Well, I think I have a treat for you today. I hope it turns out that way. First of all, before I begin, this is a live show. And the number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And if all goes well, perhaps the studio will provide a little musical break halfway through. That'll make it very easy to call in during that musical break. But if they don't, you're welcome in any case to call in anytime you wish. And I'll interrupt what I'm doing and take your question or comment or complaint. I hope not complaint. And then go back to what I'm talking about. And what will I be talking about? I will be talking about one of my absolute favorite saints, who's relatively new, both in my personal pantheon of saints and also in the Catholic Church's pantheon of saints, because he was only canonized a few years ago. In fact, very few years ago. He was canonized 4 years ago, 15th of May, 2022, and had only been beatified about 15 years earlier in 2005. He is Saint Charles de Foucauld. And perhaps after I do what I want to do with him, is read some of his meditations on the Psalms. He was essentially, and after I treat his meditations on the Psalms, perhaps I'll have more time to go into more of a biography. But in any case, he was, his dates are 1858 to 1916. He was a Frenchman. He was a wealthy, spoiled, well, I shouldn't say that, but he was a wealthy, rich, aristocratic Frenchman who became a soldier. That was his career path in the cavalry, and was quite an accomplished horseman and quite an accomplished soldier, but he got kicked out of his elite regiment for his personal morality or lack thereof. He was living in concubinage, as they say. And when he wouldn't break up with his girlfriend, you could say, he was thrown out. And then he became an explorer, and a very successful explorer. He became extremely famous in France. He was the first white person actually to explore Morocco. In other words, to introduce the geography and the culture and so forth of Morocco to the European world. And he won all sorts of prizes and became a big celebrity, and was still quite not on the straight and narrow morally, but his family had been very pious, and he became friends with a wonderful saintly priest, and he began speaking to the priest about religion, and got curious about whether the Catholic Church faith could be true. He had dismissed it as untrue when he was, I think, 15 years old, had thought it was all nonsense. When he was in high school, where have we heard that story before? But anyway, but once he became friends with this wonderful Catholic priest who was a friend of the family, he started saying a very heartfelt prayer, a very short prayer, My God, if you exist, I have to know you. My God, if you exist, I have to know you. That's all. And that was enough for Jesus to break through. All Jesus ever wants is for us to give him permission to make himself known to us. So saying that is enough to give him permission to make himself known to us. And he became not only a fervent Catholic, but he ended up becoming a monk, a hermit monk, and essentially a modern day desert father, much like the desert fathers of the first few centuries had lived in the Middle Eastern deserts of Lebanon or Syria or Egypt. Not that those countries existed as countries in those days, but the very famous founders of the monastic life in the desert of the Middle East. And he became a modern day one. And he lived alone in the Sahara Desert and befriended some local tribes who saw him as a holy man. They weren't Christian and they did not become Christian, but whether they were pagan, some were Muslim, but they recognized his holiness and revered him as a holy man. And in fact, they did come to him for healings. He healed them both by a little bit of medicine and teaching them a little bit about hygiene, but also by prayer and rather miraculous healings also. And but he ended up being martyred in the desert by a hostile tribe, and so he died in 1916 at the age of about 58. And he was pretty obscure, pretty unknown, but he had a few dozen followers or other important French Catholics who knew about him and thought highly of him. And his reputation spread after his death. And now he's a saint. So not a very complete job. Maybe I'll do more when I come back. But I just want to introduce you a little bit. The most important thing to me is that he was a contemporary desert father in the manner of the desert fathers. He lived in tremendous solitude without, for years, anyone to talk to. Except he did learn the native language, Tuareg, but he had no real companionship, no companions. He wanted to live in solitude. He wanted to live in silence. He wanted to live just in prayer and in the most abject poverty imaginable. He thought that 4 dates a day, like from a date tree, from a date palm tree, 4 dates a day was a more than adequate daily diet. He didn't possess anything. And he scratched, he occasionally had access to a date tree, and he scratched the sandy soil and, made small vegetable gardens for food. Anyway, I'm going to start with an incredibly beautiful meditation of his on one of the Psalms. It's Psalm 19. And it's the psalm that begins with the verse, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork." And after I read the psalm, I will read his commentary, kind of verse by verse, on the psalm. However, before I begin, let me just repeat that this is a live call-in program. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. If you're already a fan of St. Charles de Foucault, if you know who he is, I'd love to hear from you. I don't know how many of you there are out there, but he's certainly worth tuning into, so to speak. So, Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes forth like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can discern his errors? Clear thou me from hidden faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Now, back to Charles de Foucault. He divides this psalm, or he divides his commentary in two parts. The first part for the first 7 verses, and the second part from essentially the final 7 verses. And he points out that the first part is celebrating the glory of God as revealed in his creation of nature. And the second part celebrates the glory of God as it is revealed in his creation of man and in his establishment of the system of salvation for man. So first part is about the physical creation reflecting God in every aspect. The heavens tell of the glory of God. The firmament announces the work of his hands. Thank you, my God, for this marvelous description of your works which tell of your glory. Thank you for this so useful teaching that you give us to seek you always beyond your creation. And as soon as something you created strikes our senses, to use it to climb up closer to you. This is the lesson of this psalm, a beautiful and important lesson, not to stop at creation, but always raise ourselves from it to the Creator, to love all creation, for it is good, since it is the work of God. For everything he created contains a reflection of his beauty, something of him, for it is all a gift of his goodness, which his heart has given us. But we are not to love it all for itself, or any of it for itself. We are to love it for him, but not stopping there, but to ascend immediately from the creation to the Creator, and thus to do what they themselves do, with all our heart and with all our soul, to do what every creature does, voluntarily or involuntarily, since this is its purpose in creation, and it achieves it always one way or another. Let all of creation do what the heavens do to tell the glory of God. Let us take care not to stop at creation. It is unworthy of us. It cannot fill our heart. It will always leave us thirsty, always empty. I'm going to add a little elucidation here, just to kind of, because it goes by kind of fast, which is the basic principle is that God's beauty, his generosity, his love for us, his wisdom, his foresight is reflected in everything he created. In all of creation, you can look at a tree and admire the generosity of God, the brilliance of God, the beauty of what God is able to create. You can look at the sky. If you're of a scientific bent, you can look at the laws of atomic physics, subatomic physics. You can look at the laws of magnetism and electricity or gravity and be overwhelmed by the greatness of God, the brilliance of God, the elegance of God, the creativity of God. Everything, the external universe, the sun, the moon, the stars, the fact of light itself, the behavior of light, the fact of sound itself, any creature. Sometimes I'm absolutely amazed at, like, a fruit fly or the tiniest ant, and what wisdom is embedded in them. Not to mention the engineering to get something so small to fly, and how on earth does a mosquito fly against the wind, right? I mean, it's just amazing. Or a hummingbird stays still in a heavy wind with its microscopic beak nestled deep in the in the tube of a flower swaying back and forth in the wind. It's just everywhere you look, you see the creative beauty, generosity, brilliance of God. And we should admire it, but we shouldn't stop at admiring the object or the creature, but we should use it as a springboard to admire God who created it, and God who, by and large, created it for us, created us for our use, for our enjoyment, for our increase in holiness. And I started mentioning a tree, but if you stop to think about a tree, you can look at, I'm looking at one now out the window, maybe that's why I'm thinking of this, but you can look at this tall, majestic oak tree, 80 feet high, and it started from a tiny acorn. It's now weighs probably several tons, and the only thing that entered it to take it from the acorn to being 10 tons is air and water. As a child, I used to think that plants draw their substance from the earth, but they don't. The only source of their substance is air and water. What they draw from the earth is, like, we might eat vitamins or supplements, but that's not our food. Our food is the food we eat, and then we might take a vitamin pill. What trees or plants get from the earth is like a vitamin pill. It's trace minerals that they need. It's not their substance. The substance comes from air, the water that falls on their leaves or that gets soaked into their roots, and the air. That's it. And what does the tree give us? It gives us shade. It gives us leaves for clothing, if you're Adam and Eve. It gives us wood for building and wood for fire. I mean, what would the state of man been like if there weren't trees? Anyway, it's a very small example, but it shows the potential of using God's creation to make us think more about God. And the first half of this psalm is about doing that. And this first half of St. Charles de Foucault's meditation on this psalm is pointing that out, and that is their fundamental purpose. This is basically the fundamental purpose of physical existence in its entirety, is to enable the creation of man. And this is true of all animals. True, God didn't create animals, out of, I'm sure he loves cats and dogs and mosquitoes and spiders and all of them too, but he didn't create them for their own sake. He created them in order to create a world to be the host for the creation of man, so that he could have men to love and be loved by him for all eternity in heaven. And one day this world is going to go away entirely. All of the material in this world is going to go away. The physical world is going to go away, because its purpose will have been served, which is the souls who were blessed enough, fortunate enough to end up in heaven in unimaginable bliss with God for all eternity. And that's what he created the world for. By the way, I mentioned mosquitoes earlier. You could look at the world that God created and say, if God created everything out of his love for man and his desire for man's happiness, why did he make mosquitoes? Why did he make poisonous spiders? And so forth. And the answer is very simple. It's that man sinned. In the Garden of Eden, there were no noxious insects or dangerous animals. God created them because when man fell, the purpose of life on earth became training ground to develop morality in order to be able to qualify as a citizen in heaven. And if we lived still in the Garden of Eden with no adversity, we would not develop the right way. All of the noxious things that God created on earth are also for our good to help us get into heaven. Anyway, okay, back to Charles de Foucault. Let us take care not to stop at creation. It is unworthy of us. It cannot fill our heart. It will always leave us thirsty, always empty. The more one enjoys creation and created things, the more one hungers and the less one finds satisfaction, one's fulfillment, one's peace, for we are made for another end. The finite cannot fill the soul, made for the infinite. Let us then never stop at creation or created things, but use them as a stepping stone to ascend from them to God, who is supreme beauty, perfect beauty, creative beauty. Okay, so that was the first half of Psalm 19. Now, let me interrupt to communicate with the studio a bit. Could you please let me know whether you are able to prepare a short musical interlude? You can let me know on the text stream that we use for callers. Okay, and again, to the listeners, if you wish to call in with a question or a comment, the number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. Okay. The second half of this meditation of Charles de Foucault on Psalm 19. I'm going to briefly read the second half over again. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can discern his own errors? Clear thou me from hidden faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Okay, so to Charles de Foucault. One moment here. Okay. In the second part of the psalm, one rises from creatures to the Creator, from the beauties of natural law to the divine law. One ascends the rungs of the ladder of the level of being. One goes from the material to the immaterial. What a wonderful ladder. How thrilling it is to climb it, to go from created things without reason, already so beautiful and harmonious, to rational creatures, to the human soul before which all other visible beauties disappear as if they were nothing, and from this human soul, so beautiful though imperfect, to the fullness of perfections which are there only in seminal form. It is to God himself that we climb in the psalm, for it is at his word, at his law, at his will, at the words which he has inspired in the authors of Holy Scripture, created words, creatures and not God himself, but certain of his words express eternal truths which are part of the very essence of God, his eternal thoughts. Thank you, my God, for giving us this lesson and for teaching us in this psalm how to climb this divine ladder of the levels of beings. The law of God is faultless, perfect, converting souls. The testimony of God is faithful, trustworthy, giving wisdom to the little ones. He gives it to the humble. He gives it also to the ignorant, for whom it suffices to know and to practice this divine word, to be infinitely wise, 1,000 times wiser than the learned of the world. He gives it to children, for whom it suffices to practice it with innocence, simplicity, love, and to also be as wise old men. The commandments of God are just; they rejoice hearts. The precepts of God are luminous; they enlighten souls. Yes, my God, your yoke is sweet and light, and the only joy of man in this world is to bear it. The yoke fills one with joy, and it alone can do this, for to do your will is the only thing that can give to the soul a pure and true joy in this exile. It illumines our souls. It is only in your words that we find light. Your will, your words, which make us know it, is the light of our life, the light which is indispensable to us. We are, let me just kind of recap and say what he's doing. Remember, the first half of the psalm, he was just brimming over with love of God, the glory of God revealed in physical creation. And now he is brimming over with even more enthusiasm and appreciation for the wisdom and love and beauty of God reflected in the moral law, reflected in the laws he gave us, reflected in the opportunities he's given us to grow in holiness. Continuing. One moment, please. Remember, the number here is 866-333-6279 if you wish to call in with a question or comment. I might actually, if I remember, mention what the connection Charles de Foucault has with Judaism, which is quite interesting, but not for now. For now, I'm look on the psalm. The fear of God is holy; it will endure eternally. His words are true; they justify themselves. Yes, my God, the fear of you is holy; it will endure forever, for it is indissolubly connected to your love. No one fears more than the one who loves, and the more one loves, the more one fears. One fears not punishment, but to cause pain, to displease. One fears not pleasing enough, not proving one's love enough, not doing enough for the one whom one loves. We want to do all that we can for the one we love. We can so dread the least disapproval from him. The person one fears most in the world is the one you love. With one look, they can cause us so much suffering. My God, the next verse, my God, your law is a great deal more desirable than gold, more than the precious stone. It is sweeter than honey, than the honeycomb. Close quote. Oh yes, my God, for the one who loves you, it is 1,000 times more desirable to know your will than to have all riches. To know your will, how sweet that is to us. Next verse, quote, your servant will do it. This fulfillment carries in itself its rich reward. Close quote. And so one avoids sin, one avoids what the soul who loves you most dreads, to offend you, to displease you. Who will be able to understand the ugliness of sin? Cleanse me, my God, from all my sins, from those I know and from those I do not know, and which my eyes do not see. Protect me from those who are no strangers to you, the worldly. If the things of the world do not dominate me, if they do not take hold of my spirit, I am without stain, and I am saved from a great evil. Then my words will be able to please you, and the meditation of my heart will be always in your presence. Now this section that St. Charles de Foucault is going into is a reflection of the verses in the psalm. But who can discern his errors? Clear thou me from hidden faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. And he goes into a discussion of how those hidden faults, those presumptuous sins that have dominion over one, come from the spirit of the world, come from absorbing the spirit of the world instead of keeping oneself pure, filled with the Spirit of God. That is by way of introduction to the next couple of paragraphs. Yes, one of my great dangers is the spirit of the world. Let worldly things not give their spirit to me, and I will avoid a great danger. The world is the concupiscence of the flesh, that of the eyes, and of pride. Says St. John, sensuality, curiosity, pride. The world in its human wisdom is opposed to the gospel, to divine wisdom, which it sees as folly. The world is selfishness, avarice, and filled with unbelief. It seeks to invade us on every side. It crawls in over our walls and through closed doors. The devil constantly breathes to us this worldly spirit. People communicate it to us in many of the relationships we have with them. In our own depths we can find it. We are impregnated with it, and every motion raises to the surface of our soul this mud lying in its depths. Let us, with all our strength, keep ourselves from it, and to that purpose, let us use. And now St. Charles de Foucault goes into a little owner's manual instruction book about how to keep oneself from being influenced by the spirit of the world instead of the spirit by God. However, I have come to about the halfway point of the program, and I'm obviously, maybe not obvious to you, it's painfully obvious to me, having some technical complexities today, put it that way. But I'm going to try now to take a short musical break and play a bit of music. And I hope it works. You'll know soon enough. And if it does work, I'll be gone for about the 3 or 4 minutes of the music, during which time, if you wish to call in with a question or a comment, the number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And with that, let me see if I can get this to work.
Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Israel est tu rex, Davidis et inclita proles, nomine qui Domini, Rex benedicte venis, setus in excelsis, te laudas senicus omnis, et mortal vis homo, et cum te creata simul. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsito sana pium, plebs hebrea tibi, cum palmiso mia venit, cum precebutum nis, ad sumus et tibi, ibi pasuro, solvebant munia lauris, nos tibi regnanti, andimus exemellos, gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsito sana pium, iblaquere tibi, placeat devotio noster, Rex bone res clemens, cui bona conta placem.
Well, I don't see any calls, so I hope you enjoyed the musical break. And I will go back to Charles de Foucault's meditation on Psalm 19. You're listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. And I'm dedicating today's show to the wisdom and life of a recent saint canonized in 2022, I believe. 2022, St. Charles de Foucault, a modern-day desert father. So with that, I just got to the second half of Psalm 19, where St. Charles de Foucault is praising God for the creation of the human soul, for the creation of the system of salvation, for the creation of the moral law, for everything that orders human life and prepares the human soul for graduation to eternal life in heaven. And he talked about in the context of meditating on the psalm, he talked about the great danger of the spirit of the world and being polluted by the spirit of the world. And then he gives the following recipe book for how to avoid being polluted by the spirit of the world. So that's where I'm continuing from. Let us, with all our strength, keep ourselves from it. And to that purpose, let us use the following means. Means number 1, prayer. Let us beg God to render us foolish with the gospel, foolish with divine wisdom, folly in the eyes of men. Prayer, step number 2, it's the second part of the recipe. Let us fill ourselves with reading and meditation on the Holy Gospel. Let us fill ourselves with it, know it, so that its maxims come unceasingly to our lips and fill our spirits and our hearts. So rather than resisting the spirit of the world by an outward gesture of resisting the spirit of the world, let us fill ourselves with the spirit of the gospel, with the spirit of God, so that we are already saturated with it. And that will provide us with the resistance, with the impregnability of the spirit of the world. Method 3, holy poverty, which is the opposite of the spirit of the world. The more we will cultivate it, the more we will distance ourselves from the world and the more the world, which has a horror of it, will distance itself from us. Method number 4, objection. One can say the same which we have just said of poverty. Method 5, solitude. The less we see people, the less they can give us their confusion. 6, penance. 7, pious reading. Books written by saints and consequently full of the Spirit of God, of the spirit opposed to that of the world, and the story of the saints, that is, the stories of souls who were enemies of the world, who spent their lives in opposition to the maxims of the world, whose examples are those of a mortal combat against the world. To distance ourselves from the lifestyle of worldly people in their way of doing, thinking, speaking. In doing so, we plainly declare that we are not of this world. We can show oneself in a state of war with it. These means are very powerful, but what perseverance, what faith is needed to put them into regular practice. Above all else, the love of God. He it is who chases from our souls all phantoms, all those follies of worldly ideas. It is he who enlightens us, gives us intelligence, makes us realize the truth, gives us a loathing of vanities, sensualities, curiosities of worldly goods. It is he who makes us see the whole world and what the world values to be as mud, and makes us value but one thing, our Savior Jesus, his examples and his words, which we love as passionately as we profoundly despise all the rest. Quote, it is in the light of your love that we will see light, close quote. O Jesus, my Lord, my support and my Redeemer. Amen. Now I'm just going to add 2 things or interject 2 things or make 2 comments. One is, I do not remember who the saint was, but at a mass I was at recently that was for the saint's feast day, the priest mentioned that his motto was, what does this matter in the light of eternity? What does this matter in the light of eternity? When something happens to you, what does it matter in the light of eternity? When you have misfortune, what does it matter in the light of eternity? Because it is only what it matters in the light of eternity which truly matters. And just think of how often what happens that's extremely unpleasant to us might actually have a very positive meaning in the light of eternity. We all know, well, I hope we all know, many of us know, the positive side effects of suffering, the increase in patience, the increase in self-sacrifice, the increase in dependence on others, the increase in trust in God. There are many valuable fruits of suffering in the eyes of eternity, and so forth and so on. But it's a good thing to keep in mind. And I think that saying, asking yourself, what does it matter in the light of eternity, is very parallel to these instructions to resist the spirit of the world. Because the spirit of eternity is essentially the spirit of God, which is the opposite of the spirit of the world. And the more you're focused on the spirit of God and what things matter to God and what things look like in the eyes of God, the less vulnerable you are to the temptations of basically the devil and the flesh and the ego. That was one comment I wanted to make. And the other comment was pious reading. And it's a very small comment, but I had a wonderful, wonderful spiritual director who I am convinced is now in heaven. He died a very holy death and was a very, very purified, let's say, by his final suffering, which was absolutely horrible for a number of years. I'll call him Father Greg. That was his first name. And whenever I went to him for spiritual direction, and I was complaining about my spiritual life, he only had one question, which is, what's your spiritual reading these days? What spiritual reading are you doing these days? And he also always hit the nail on the head. the greatest single thing you can do to defend your spiritual life, so to speak, defend your inner spirit to be kind of intrinsically pious and intrinsically religious and intrinsically focused on God, is spiritual reading. And spiritual reading not being defined as reading theology, but simply reading books either about saints or by saints, just so that you get filled with the perspective of the world which they had. Because it's that perspective that they had which made them saints. And it's that perspective which they had which made them saints, which, as you absorb it, will give you immunity against the spirit of the world. It's like a sponge. If you have a sponge, filled with clean water and you drop it in a muddy puddle, it's not going to absorb much mud because it's already full. But if it's an empty sponge, a dry sponge, then it can suck up all the muddy water at once. Anyway, not the world's best metaphor, but you get the point. Okay, well, I do have a little time left. I'm going to tell what Saint Charles de Foucault's relationship to Jews and Judaism is, just because it's funny and because it's of interest to me. When he ended his military career due to his lack of self-discipline, he had fallen in love while he was in the army. He was stationed in the Sahara, which was a French possession at that time, or at least this part of the Sahara. Algeria was a French colony. And he was stationed there, and he fell in love with the desert, and he fell in love with the solitude of the desert and the quiet of the desert. And at the time, the country of Morocco was totally unexplored by Europeans and unknown in the Western world. And not only that, any European, any Westerner who ventured into Morocco would be killed on sight. Morocco was inhabited by nomadic tribes. Some were pagan, some were Muslim. They all lived very close to a starvation existence, and they all had a tremendous animosity towards Europeans because they were trying to protect their way of life against the colonial influences that European culture and countries were having on the native life in North Africa. And also there was a lot of, basically Europeans were the enemy and they were a threat. And the only way they could protect themselves from that threat was to remain undiscovered by them, to remain an unknown land to them that they could not venture into, that they could not find anything about. But Charles de Foucault wanted to explore Morocco and map it. And the reason he wanted to map it was because North Africa, the tension between Germany and France, which exploded in the First World War, we're now talking about, let's say about 1910, 1912, so forth, that kind of time period. There was a kind of war brewing between France and Germany, and North Africa was going to be a battleground in that war, and that was kind of understood by the French military, and that it was going to be in play. And the French had Algeria, and next to it was Morocco, and they wanted to be able to establish forts and outposts in Morocco to defend their territory in Algeria, but also they wanted to be able to travel through Morocco in order to have access to their fortifications and their assets in Algeria. They needed to know where the roads were. There weren't any roads, of course, but they needed to know where the paths were that vehicles could perhaps travel on, that horses and camels could cross. They didn't even know, obviously, the camel trading routes. They want to know those. They want to know where the water holes were, which of course they would need if they were going to cross the desert. They want to know where the mountains were so they could avoid the mountains, and where the lowlands were so they could travel on flat land with their horses and so forth. So they wanted it explored. So Charles de Foucault decided to explore it out of his patriotism, out of his desire to help his native country. But he couldn't enter without being killed on sight as a European. So what he did was he disguised himself as a rabbi, as a Middle Eastern rabbi, because there were a lot of rabbis in the Middle East. There were a lot of Jews there. There have always been a lot of Jews in North Africa since the days of Jesus, since the days before Jesus. And they were tolerated. They weren't liked. They were discriminated against. They were harassed, but they were allowed. They were like the bottom rung of the social class. So he found a elderly, oh, I shouldn't say elderly, he wasn't elderly, but he was older than Charles de Foucault. He found a rabbi who had traveled in Morocco. The rabbis would travel in Morocco. I'm not exactly sure why. It had something, there were Jewish settlements throughout Morocco where there were Jewish traders that had to do with the camel routes and the camel trade and so forth. So he pretended to be a junior rabbi in the trail of the senior rabbi, and he pretended, I think, to be mute, so that the fact that he did not know Hebrew or spoke properly as a native North African rabbi would speak would go undetected. And so he spent, I don't know how long it was, a year or two, at the risk of his life, many close brushes with death, traveling through Morocco, mapping it, taking copious notes, came back to France, published a book called Knowledge of Morocco, which became absolutely, made him super famous as the first explorer to explore Morocco. And it was in that state of tremendous, wealth, aristocracy, pride, fame from the book that his conversion took place and made him a absolute poor, brink of starvation, desert hermit, because he chose the better part. He chose the better part. He lived the life of throwing away wealth and riches and women and fame to embrace poverty, solitude, prayer, persecution, with enthusiasm, with love in his heart for it, because he was doing it all for Jesus, imitating Jesus, imitating the poverty of Jesus, imitating the persecution of Jesus, imitating the suffering of Jesus, and in the end, imitating the martyrdom of Jesus. So that is my version of your brief introduction to Charles de Foucault. By far the best book on his life, was written just about within a few years after he died by René Bazin, B-A-Z-I-N. And it's actually that book, the biography of him, that was written, which helped him become better known and eventually led to his canonization. So with that, you've been listening to Roy Schoeman on Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria. I hope you've enjoyed this, both the spiritual enlightenment or spiritual wisdom of Charles de Foucault, and also a little bit about his life and the twists and turns of it and of his conversion. So with that, it's time for me to say goodbye, and I hope you join us again next week, same time, same place, for Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism. Bye for now.
Thank you so much for listening to the Radio Maria podcasts. It's thanks to listeners like you who donate that enable us to continue delivering quality content to listeners around the world. If you'd like to contribute and help us keep spreading the message of Our Lady's Son, please consider making a donation. You can reach us at 888-40-80201 or simply visit our donations tab on our website at radiomaria.us. Your generosity truly makes a difference. This has been a Radio Maria production.